waiting for the POCO X3 video, and well, it's finally here. This is the POCO X3 Indian variant, and yes, it does bring some upgrades as well as downgrades when compared to the very popular POCO X2, and well, I'm going to tell you all about it, so let's begin. First, let's find out what's in the box of the POCO X3. So in the box you get the USB-C cable, the 33-watt fast charger, the transparent silicon case, the SIM ejector tool, and that's pretty much it. Now this is the new POCO X3, and this is the first POCO phone after the legendary F1 to have its kind of own unique design. Yep, it's not a rebranded Redmi phone, but I think overall the design is fine. I mean, you probably know that this is a plastic bag, and I don't know why there's this new trend of plastic in the sub 20k price range. The Realme 7 Pro has a plastic bag, Samsung phones have a plastic bag, and now the POCO X3 has a plastic bag. I mean, it looks fine in the shots, it does look like glass, but in person the POCO X2 is still the more premium phone with the glass finish. As for the new style camera setup and the big bold POCO logo, I kind of like how it looks with the light falling on it, but I think this is very subjective and not everyone will like this big logo. When it comes to the in-hand feel, it's even thicker and heftier than the POCO X2 at 10.1 millimeters thickness and 225 grams of weight, so that's something you should know. The functionality is pretty solid though. This whole design is IP53 rated, so the phone should be fine with some splashes of water. As for the ports and buttons, it's kind of usual, but there are a couple of key things to note. There's an IR blaster on the top, which is nice. The dual SIM plus micro SD slot is a hybrid one, so that's something to note. There's a tiny notification LED on the top speaker grill, and there's one upgrade in the design front that I really like a lot. Moving on to the display, which remains the same, and that's not a bad thing. It's a 6.67-inch IPS LCD display with 120Hz refresh rate and 240Hz touch sampling, HDR10 support, and Gorilla Glass 5 on top. So this seems to be another great high refresh rate display from POCO, and I like it so far. The scrolling and the MIUI 12 animations on the 120Hz panel look great, and the display is pretty good too. It's fairly bright, especially in the auto mode, and the contrast, the colors look fairly good. Plus the phone has the wide L1 license, which a lot of Redmi phones still have problems with, so that's a good thing. I checked and Full HD playback is supported on Netflix, so yeah, that's good news. So all that is good, but I have read about some touch ghosting issues in the international variant of the POCO X3, so that's something I'll be testing out. Now, one upgrade that people have been confused about is the Snapdragon 732G chipset. Well, the POCO X2 is obviously the first phone to pack in the new 732G chipset. So how is this an upgrade over the 730G? What's new? Well, not much. Let me show you. So the Snapdragon 732G and Snapdragon 730G have the same Cryo 470 CPU and the same Adreno 618 GPU, but the 732G has a slightly higher clock speed on both the CPU and GPU. Not a big difference, but yeah, that's it. Both the chipsets also have the same Spectra 350 ISP, the same X15 LTE modem with Wi-Fi 6 support, and the only difference here is the support for Bluetooth 5.1 in the 732G. Now that's pretty much it. Those are the only differences. So honestly, the 732G isn't exactly a big or any meaningful upgrade over the 730G. Yes, the slightly higher clock speeds result in slightly better benchmark scores, as you can see, but yeah, the real world performance shouldn't be a big difference. So like the 730G, the 732G should be able to handle high-end games and usual day-to-day tasks. Now I have put in my SIM card in the POCO X3, so I'm testing things out, but so far things seem positive. When it comes to software, there's MIUI 12 on board, so you get all the cool new features, and since this is MIUI for POCO, I haven't seen any ads, and there's the POCO launcher, so that's great. However, the very cool super wallpapers from MIUI 12 are not installed here, so that's kind of a bummer. As for any bloatware, there are a few of them. There are these apps, Amazon, Facebook, WPS Office, Netflix, etc., but you can install each one of them. There are also these weird games which can be uninstalled too, so yeah, you can uninstall them, that's good news. As for any privacy issues, the phone does have the infamous Cleaner app, but it now only takes up the storage permission, so I'm glad Xiaomi has fixed this. Having said that, there's the security app which takes up almost every single permission, and there's no way you can deny the app these permissions, as you can see. So again, this is weird, and I don't think a security app needs all these permissions like the microphone or the location. Next up are the cameras, where there are a few changes over the POCO X2. You still get the 64 megapixel primary camera, but it's now the IMX682 over the IMX686 on the X2. There's a 13 megapixel ultra wide angle lens, which on paper seems like an upgrade over the X2's 8 megapixel sensor. Apart from that, there are the customary 2 megapixel lenses that honestly nobody cares about. Now the POCO X2 had very good cameras for the price range, and the photos from the X3 look good too. I mean, the IMX 682 isn't exactly a downgrade over the 686. The only difference I know of is support for 4K 60 FPS in the 686, but that's kind of irrelevant here. Anyway, so the shots look good when there's good light, and in low light too, things seem decent so far, although I did notice a slightly warmer tone in some photos, so yeah, that's something I'll have to check. As for the ultra wide angle lens, the photos from it does seem fairly detailed and there's very good dynamic range, so it definitely seems good for a phone in this price range. On the front you get a 20 megapixel selfie camera, and yeah, there's no secondary depth sensor, but I think that sensor was kind of useless anyway, so that's okay. Lastly, there's the battery, which I think is the biggest upgrade here. It's a massive 6000 mAh battery that should last very long, and this is good because I know a lot of people who have bought the POCO X2 and the big complaint has been the battery, especially at 120 Hz. So this big battery should fix that. The charger is faster too. This is the 33 watt charger you get in the box, and I haven't really tested it so far, but it should be pretty fast. So coming to the pricing now, the POCO X3 starts at rupees 16,999 in India, and that's actually lesser than the current starting price of the POCO X2, and I think that makes sense because the POCO X3, let's face it, is not a huge big upgrade over the POCO X2. I mean, the stereo speakers are nice and the big battery and faster charging are great additions, but the rest of the phone isn't a whole lot different from the POCO X2. There's the same 120Hz display, the 732G is basically a slightly overclocked 730G, the cameras don't seem very different, in fact there's a downgrade too in the form of the plastic build now. So yeah, the POCO X3 is not a perfect phone or a perfect upgrade too. So if you're wondering if you should buy this or not, well, I'll suggest you to wait because I'll be using this phone in the next few days, comparing it to other phones, and then come to a verdict. So yes, stay tuned.